The sound of laughter around the lavish, sprawling dinner table felt like a physical force, a wave of humiliation that pressed me down into my plush, upholstered chair. My father's voice, loud and booming with condescension and a hint of cruel amusement, cut through the noise of clinking cutlery and casual family chatter. "A logistics software company? You! Nora, please, don't make me laugh." He shook his head, a wide, mocking grin spreading across his face as he looked at the other relatives for their approval and agreement. "It's a cute little hobby, I'll give you that. Playing with computer code. But a real, viable business. Be serious and get your head out of the clouds." My cheeks burned with a familiar, hot, stinging humiliation that reached the tips of my ears. I stared down at my untouched plate, the perfectly cooked roast chicken and rosemary potatoes suddenly looking completely unappetizing and foreign. My older brother, James, smirked from his seat of honor directly across from me, eagerly adding fuel to the fire that our father had so gleefully ignited. "She's been spending way too much time alone on her computer, Dad." I think she genuinely believes writing code is the same as running a real, profitable company with actual employees. My father slammed his open hand on the polished wood of the table, making the silverware jump and rattle in a jarring symphony of disapproval. "Enough of this childish nonsense. You're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing this entire family with these ridiculous pipe dreams. You need to know your place, be realistic, and go out and get a proper, respectable job like a normal person." I pushed my heavy chair back from the table, my entire body trembling with a potent mixture of pure fury and deep, profound shame. I didn't trust myself to speak a single word. I just turned and walked away from the table, and with every step on the thick carpet, I felt something hopeful and vital inside me finally shatter into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. My name is Nora Ellis, and that dreadful, utterly humiliating family dinner was the pivotal night I finally saw the painful, unvarnished truth about my own father. My father didn't just doubt my abilities or my ambition. He seemed to actively, perversely enjoy putting me in my place, cutting me down to a size he could control and understand. He had built his own manufacturing empire, Titan Works, from the ground up through sheer force of will and relentless drive. But he never once believed a woman, and especially his own daughter, could possess the same level of strategic drive, raw intelligence, and uncompromising grit that he prided himself on. In his narrow, traditional world, control was his primary language of love, and my growing, independent ambition was seen as a direct, personal threat to his authority and his legacy. As I walked out of his opulent, cold house that night, the heavy, oak door closing behind me with a sense of finality, he called out, his voice echoing mockingly in the quiet, suburban street. "You'll be back. You'll come crawling back when this little fantasy of yours inevitably fails, just like I said it would." I made a silent, solemn promise to myself, right there on his perfectly manicured emerald green lawn, under the cold, distant, and uncaring stars. I would rather crawl over acres of broken, glittering glass than ever ask him for a single dollar or a shred of his conditional approval ever again. The practical, financial consequences of my defiance arrived just 2 days later, and they were brutally immediate and stark. My debit card was declined at the local grocery store while I was trying to buy basic necessities like bread and milk. A frantic, disbelieving check of my banking app on my phone showed my primary account, which he had funded for my living expenses and my final semester's university tuition, had been completely and mercilessly drained to a zero balance. A few minutes later, a stern email notification arrived from my landlord, informing me my rent check had bounced. Then, as if to drive the point home, a terse, cold text message lit up my phone's screen. It was from my father. It read, "Tough love builds character. Time to stop playing make-believe and get a real job." I sat on the bare, cold floor of my tiny, sparse studio apartment and cried hot, angry, frustrated tears for what felt like hours, my whole body shaking with the injustice of it. Then, I wiped my face raw with my sleeve, took a deep, shuddering breath, listed my almost new high-performance laptop for sale on a local online marketplace, and used the money to buy a cheaper, slower, refurbished model. The decision was made, forged in fire. I would build my business, my logistics software platform, from nothing, even if the relentless effort and immense stress killed me slowly in the process. My first real, formal pitch to a group of potential angel investors was a spectacular, soul-crushing public failure that haunted me for weeks. My live demo, which I had practiced and polished for weeks until I could do it in my sleep, froze catastrophically midway through the most important graphical display. The infamous, mocking spinning wheel of death on the large presentation screen felt like a personal indictment of my entire existence and my worth. The investors in their expensive suits offered me polite, condescending smiles that didn't reach their cold, calculating eyes. "It's certainly an ambitious idea, Nora," one of them said, his tone dripping with a patronizing pity that was worse than outright rejection. "But perhaps not quite realistic or robust enough for the current market demands. It feels a bit unproven." That night, dejected and utterly defeated, I slept on the lumpy, uncomfortable couch in my friend Chloe's living room, wrapped in a thin, spare blanket. I scrolled through a business news article on my phone. It featured a beaming, triumphant photo of my father accepting a Regional Business Leader of the Year award at a black tie gala. The stark, painful juxtaposition of my very public failure and his very public celebrated success was a uniquely bitter, acidic pill to swallow. Just as the deep, dark despair was beginning to feel like a permanent, inescapable state of being, a small, unexpected miracle happened, arriving like a lifeline. A reply appeared in my normally quiet, cluttered, and lonely professional inbox. It was from the owner of a small, local, family-run logistics firm, Quick Step Deliveries. The email was short, direct, and refreshingly devoid of corporate fluff or false promises. "Your cold email caught my eye. We're willing to test your software for 1 month in our local delivery operations. No promises and no payment unless we see concrete, measurable results." I read those few, precious lines over and over again, my heart hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. Someone, a complete stranger, was actually giving me a chance, a real shot. It was a tiny, fragile, but very real crack of light breaking through a very dark and heavy door, and I was absolutely determined to pry it wide open with my own 2 tired hands. A week into the crucial, make-or-break trial period with Quick Step Deliveries, my personal phone rang, shattering my concentration. It was my brother, James. I hadn't spoken to him since the disastrous family dinner that had started this whole journey. "Hey, Nora," he said, his tone dripping with a false, syrupy concern that I knew all too well and deeply distrusted. "Dad mentioned you're still playing around with that fake little company of yours. You know you'll never make any real, substantial money with that, right? It's just a fantasy, a distraction. You should just give it up." I hung up the phone without a single word in response, my hands shaking once again with a familiar, simmering rage. But this time, something was different. I didn't delete his contact from my phone in a fit of pique. I saved it. I wanted him, and my father, to have a permanent, front-row seat for the day they would have to sit in silent, stunned awe and watch everything I built from the bare ashes of their mockery and disdain. Tense, 1-month trial period with Quick Step Deliveries finally, nerve-wrackingly came to an end. The owner, Mr. Evans, called me personally, his voice sounding different than before. "Nora," he said, a clear note of surprise and newfound respect in his voice. "I have to admit I was very skeptical when we started, but your software, against my expectations, cut our most problematic local delivery routing costs by a full 20%. The drivers are happier, the routes are smarter. I'm genuinely impressed." He promptly sent a payment of $2,000 to my business account for the trial period. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but in that moment, staring at the number on the screen, it was everything. I held my phone, staring at the bank transfer confirmation until the screen went dark, and I cried quiet, cathartic tears of relief and validation. Not because of the money itself, but because I had finally, tangibly, undeniably proven that my idea had real-world value and could solve real problems. I had proven something critically important to the most important person, myself. A few days after the payment cleared, a soft, hesitant, almost apologetic knock came at my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother, standing there holding 2 heavy, overstuffed bags of groceries, her expression filled with a deep, weary sadness and a mother's guilt. "I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart," she said, her eyes quickly scanning my cramped, sparse, and undecorated apartment, taking in the stark reality of my situation. "Your father." He doesn't really mean to be so cruel, you know. He's just old-fashioned and set in his ways. He truly thinks he's doing what's best for you in his own misguided manner. But when her gaze landed on my cracked-screen laptop on the wobbly desk and the single, thin mattress on the floor in the corner, her eyes welled up with unchecked tears. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You deserve so much better than this. You deserve the world." Her quiet, helpless guilt and her powerlessness in the face of my father's tyranny were in some ways even harder to bear than his loud, active, and deliberate contempt. I was in the middle of preparing a new, innovative software update for my now first client, Mr. Evans, when a panicked, concerning email from him arrived in my inbox. "Nora, we've had some serious second thoughts. We need to talk immediately. Someone from the industry called the office, said you were completely unreliable and difficult to work with, and that your software has major security flaws and actively steals client data." My blood ran cold in my veins, a freezing river of dread. I immediately called him, my heart pounding, and convinced him to tell me everything he knew. He described the anonymous caller's voice in detail. An older man, very authoritative and commanding, used a lot of business jargon. Said he was an industry insider with confidential knowledge of your unstable operations. There was not a single, lingering doubt in my mind. It was my father. He wasn't just passively waiting for me to fail. He was actively, secretly, and maliciously trying to sabotage me from the shadows, to ensure my failure with his own manipulative hands. Despite my father's underhanded, cowardly, and desperate attempt to destroy my hard-earned credibility and my one shot, Mr. Evans, to his immense credit and my eternal gratitude, decided to stick with me. He was impressed by my immediate, transparent handling of the situation, and more importantly, the undeniable, positive results my software had already delivered for his bottom line. His strong, enthusiastic, verbal recommendation to a business associate later led to something much, much bigger. A medium-sized, well-regarded regional distributor, Heartland Goods, reached out to me via email. They had heard through the grapevine about the significant cost savings and efficiency gains at Quick Step. They offered me a proper, paid, 3-month contract to overhaul their entire, complex logistics framework. My hands trembled with a mix of thrilling excitement and sheer terror as I signed the digital document, my finger hesitating over the trackpad for a moment before clicking. This was no longer just a trial run or a proof of concept. This was my first real, paying, serious client, the first solid, undeniable step on the long, arduous path toward building the very empire my father had so publicly and cruelly mocked at that fateful dinner. I was cornered near the punch bowl at my grandmother's 75th birthday party, a family event I had attended with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. My father, holding a glass of expensive, amber whiskey, leaned in far too close, his breath smelling faintly of peat and unwarranted privilege. "So, how's the imaginary empire coming along these days, Nora?" he asked, a smug, condescending smirk plastered on his face, his eyes glinting with amusement at my discomfort. "Still playing around with computer code like a teenager. Haven't come to your senses yet." The familiar, suffocating heat of humiliation rose in my chest, threatening to choke me, but this time, I consciously refused to drop my gaze to the floor in submission. I met his eyes squarely, holding his stare with a newfound strength I didn't know I possessed. "It's growing," I said, my voice surprisingly steady and clear in the noisy room. "Seems to be doing considerably better than your loyalty, at least." The smirk instantly vanished from his face, wiped away and replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated shock, and then a quick, rising tide of anger. It was the first time I had ever talked back to him as an equal, as another businessperson, and for a single, glorious moment, I saw a visible, hairline crack in his seemingly impenetrable, arrogant armor. A week after the tense birthday party, James showed up unannounced at my shared, noisy, vibrant co-working space, a place he clearly found distasteful. He looked around the bustling, energetic, collaborative room with obvious distaste, as if he'd stepped into a chaotic zoo filled with odd creatures. "Look, Nora," he began, putting on his best impression of a concerned, responsible, and wise older brother, a role he had never genuinely filled. Be realistic here for your own good. Dad is never, ever going to take you seriously if you're stubbornly on your own out here in the wilderness. Here's my proposal, a way out for you. We merge your little project under the Titan Works corporate umbrella. I'll manage it, provide the adult supervision and oversight it clearly needs. You'll finally get the powerful, respected family name and vast resources behind it. It's the only way you'll ever amount to anything in his eyes. The offer was so transparently selfish and manipulative it was almost laughable, a pathetic attempt at a corporate hostile takeover disguised as family help. He didn't want to help me succeed. He wanted to absorb my hard work and innovative ideas and take all the credit and profit for himself. No, thank you, James, I said, my voice firm and leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or further discussion. His face darkened with immediate, sputtering fury, and he turned on his heel and stormed out, the heavy glass door slamming shut behind him with a loud, satisfying final thud that echoed through the space. A prominent, influential local tech blogger who had heard about my successful work with Heartland Goods through an industry contact wrote a glowing, feature-length story about me and my company. The headline read, "The young founder revolutionizing local commerce with smart, affordable logistics." The day the article was published online and shared across social media, my professional inbox exploded with dozens of new, serious inquiries from potential clients, and more importantly, a few genuinely curious and interested early-stage investors. For the first time since I started, I felt a real, undeniable flicker of powerful momentum, a sense that the tide was finally, irrevocably turning in my favor after a long, hard fight. That same evening, as I was reviewing the exciting influx of emails at my desk, my personal phone rang, vibrating insistently. The screen showed my father's name, a sight that usually made my stomach clench. He didn't bother with a greeting or a simple hello. "Stop trying to embarrass this family with your desperate, pathetic grab for attention in the press," he growled, his voice low and venomous, filled with a barely contained rage. "You're going to single-handedly destroy our hard-earned, spotless reputation that I built over decades." For the very first time, beneath the bluster and the anger, I heard it clearly, unmistakably. My father was genuinely, deeply nervous about me and the threat I now represented. His threat, his attempt to intimidate me, hung heavily in the air between us, a toxic cloud over the phone line, but it no longer held the power to paralyze me with fear or self-doubt as it once would have. "You're suddenly so worried about the family reputation," I replied, my voice cold and clear as ice, each word chosen deliberately. "You should be. Frankly, you've already done a pretty good job of tarnishing it all by yourself with your own behavior and your treatment of people, starting with me." There was a stunned, profound, and weighty silence on the other end of the line, a void where his anger had been, followed by the sharp, definitive, and final click of him hanging up on me, unable to handle the truth. I placed my phone down gently on the desk, and a surge of pure, unadulterated power and liberation rushed through me, warming me from the inside out. I had drawn a clear, bright line in the sand, and I was now standing firmly, confidently, and permanently on my side of it, ready to defend my territory. The positive press from the blog and my growing, impressive list of satisfied clients led to serious, formal interest from the professional investment community. I secured a formal, high-stakes meeting with a respected early-stage venture capital firm known for backing bold, tech-driven ideas. I walked into their sleek, minimalist offices with my refined, data-heavy pitch deck and my folder of proven client results and glowing testimonials. A week later, after a nerve-wracking wait, they made me an official, exciting offer, $250,000 in seed funding to scale my operations. I was no longer just a girl with a laptop and a dream. I was now a legitimately funded, serious startup founder with the resources to make real noise. Incredibly, and almost laughably, on that very same day of my triumph, James posted a message on his professional LinkedIn profile, a platform he used for corporate posturing. "So incredibly proud of my little sister for finally taking our father's sound, wise advice, and making something of herself. Family support is everything. Proud big brother." The sheer, breathtaking audacity and hypocrisy of it made me gasp aloud in disbelief. He was actively, shamelessly trying to rewrite history, to claim a piece of my success as his own, to bask in a reflected glory he had done nothing but try to extinguish. It made my blood boil with a fresh, clean, clarifying anger. But this time, I knew exactly how to channel that fiery fury into productive, relentless, and unstoppable fuel for my company's engine. With the seed funding securely in the company bank account, I was finally able to hire 2 brilliantly talented, passionate developers and a sharp, no-nonsense, highly organized operations manager to form the core of my team. Our small, dedicated, and close-knit team worked long, grueling, caffeine-fueled days and late nights, tirelessly refining, testing, and improving the software, which we now officially and proudly called Nexus Logistics. Meanwhile, through my growing, extensive network of industry contacts and former classmates, I started hearing persistent, consistent whispers about Titan Works, my father's once mighty and seemingly untouchable company. They were struggling, and struggling badly. They were losing long-time, loyal clients to more modern, agile, and tech-savvy competitors who could offer better prices and faster service. Their factories were outdated, their equipment obsolete, and their shipping and supply chain costs were soaring uncontrollably, eating into their profits. The very problems my software was specifically, elegantly designed to solve were now slowly, inexorably, and fatally choking his traditional, stubbornly old-fashioned business from the inside out. It was a form of poetic, karmic justice I had never dared to expect or hope for, but I welcomed it all the same with a quiet, determined satisfaction. My mother called me late one evening, her voice thick with tears and emotional strain, the weight of the family crisis evident in every shaky word. "Nora, it's your father's company. It's in real, serious, dire trouble. The board is absolutely furious with him and his refusal to adapt. He might lose everything he's built over his entire lifetime. Everything." She paused, and I could feel the desperate, unspoken maternal plea traveling through the phone line, a silent hope for a reconciliation, for me to be the bigger person. Maybe you could help him. Your new modern system, you could fix things for him, couldn't you? You could save Titan Works. For a single, weak, sentimental moment, my hard-won resolve wavered, my stern composure cracking. The little girl inside me, the one who still desperately, painfully craved her daddy's approval and love, stirred with a powerful, aching longing. But then I remembered with vivid, painful clarity the sound of his roaring laughter at the dinner table, the discovery of his malicious sabotage of my first client, the sheer depth of his cruelty when he cut me off financially. "Mom," I said softly, but with an iron core of unshakable firmness, "I will help, but not yet, and certainly not for him." I was having a casual, relationship-building business lunch with a parts supplier who had recently stopped working exclusively with the floundering Titan Works. Over dessert and coffee, he leaned in confidentially across the table, lowering his voice so the other restaurant patrons wouldn't hear. "Between you and me, and this is strictly off the record," he said, his expression serious, "the old man's company is on the rocks, taking on water fast. I heard from my buddy who sits on the board that they're putting out quiet, discreet feelers for a buyer, anyone who can take this sinking ship off their hands. They want a private, hushed-up, quick sale to avoid a public scandal and total embarrassment in the business pages." My heart skipped a single, hard, painful beat, then began to race like a galloping horse, my mind already calculating, planning. This was it. The monumental, life-changing opportunity I had never even allowed myself to dream of was now materializing right in front of me, ripe for the taking, a chance for a reckoning I had earned with every drop of sweat and tear. I immediately worked with my shrewd, discreet corporate lawyer to create a completely anonymous holding company, which we named Atlas Holdings, to project an image of strength and stability. Through this completely anonymous, untraceable entity, we initiated discreet, professional, and hard-nosed negotiations to purchase the floundering, debt-ridden Titan Works out of its misery. The board, desperate for any lifeline to avoid a humiliating public bankruptcy and the total dissolution of the company, was surprisingly eager and quick to deal, accepting our initial offer with very little pushback. The night the final, binding acquisition papers came through for my signature, delivered by a special courier, my hand shook so badly I could barely hold the pen steady enough to write my own name. I signed my name, Nora Ellis, the once mocked and dismissed daughter, on the dotted line that legally made me the sole owner of Titan Works, my father's life's work. The silence in my apartment that night was profound, deafening, and utterly, deeply, personally satisfying on a level I could never adequately describe. My first official, decisive act as the new, undisputed owner was to call an immediate, mandatory all-hands meeting at the Titan Works headquarters, a place that held so many complicated childhood memories for me. I walked into the familiar, intimidatingly large main conference room, a place I had only ever seen from the doorway as a quiet, ignored, and insignificant child, never permitted to enter. The murmuring, anxious crowd of managers and longtime staff fell into a stunned, bewildered, and deeply confused silence as I walked purposefully to the front of the room and took the podium, my back straight. I saw the slow dawning of recognition, followed by sheer, unadulterated shock and disbelief on dozens of familiar, aging faces. The daughter that Frank Ellis had consistently, publicly belittled and dismissed was now standing confidently at the front of his beloved boardroom, in charge of his destiny. The news of the shocking acquisition traveled through the company's gossip network like a wildfire, but my father, who had been forcibly and unceremoniously removed from the board by the vote that approved the sale, was still blissfully, arrogantly, and pathetically in the dark, believing himself to be untouchable. The next morning, as I was beginning to review the company's dismal financial records, the heavy, polished oak doors of the main conference room burst open with a violent, splintering crash. My father stood there, his face a frightening, mottled shade of purple, consumed with an uninformed, self-righteous rage. "What the hell is going on in my company?" He roared, his eyes scanning the room of nervous, pale employees before finally, inevitably landing on me, seated calmly in his old leather chair at the head of the long table. "You, what in God's name do you think you're doing in here? Get out of my chair." I remained perfectly, deliberately seated, my posture calm and composed, a stark contrast to his sputtering fury. I slowly, almost ceremoniously, slid a single copy of the thick acquisition contract across the gleaming, polished surface of the table. It spun to a stop directly in front of him. "I'm running my company," I said, my voice even, steady, and devoid of the fear he expected. "To be perfectly clear, I'm your boss now." The silence that followed my words was absolute, heavy, and profound, so thick you could almost touch it. I watched, transfixed, as the blind, sputtering fury in his eyes dissolved into stunned, horrified, and then complete, devastating comprehension. His hands, resting on the table for support, began to tremble uncontrollably, a visible, physical manifestation of his world collapsing. He tried to fight the inevitable with everything he had left in his arsenal, a desperate, last-ditch effort to reclaim his lost kingdom. He hired a team of expensive, aggressive lawyers, frantically claiming the sale was fraudulent, coercive, and illegal, that he had been tricked. He called every old investor and business contact he could think of, begging and pleading with them to intervene on his behalf, to reverse this terrible, humiliating outcome. But the sale was completely airtight, legally pristine, and meticulously documented, and the investors had long ago lost all faith in his outdated, failing, and stubborn leadership. They saw me as a fresh, necessary wind of change. In a final, desperate, and pathetic meeting in my new, spacious office, which had once been his sacred, imposing office, he finally broke down completely, the facade of the powerful Titan crumbling to dust. "You are nothing," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and utter despair, a man staring into the abyss. "You were nothing without me. I made you." I looked at him, the man who had once seemed like an unconquerable giant in my eyes, and felt only a deep, overwhelming, and surprisingly sad sense of pity for the hollow man he had become. I offered him a small, calm, and ultimately victorious smile, a smile of closure. "Maybe that was true once, a long time ago," I said quietly, the words hanging in the air between us. "But now, clearly, neither are you." I did not dismantle Titan Works out of petty spite or a desire for vengeful destruction. That was his way, not mine. Instead, I began a careful, thoughtful, and strategic restructuring of the entire company, from the ground up. I invested a significant portion of my own capital and the company's remaining resources into modernizing the dilapidated, inefficient factories and upgrading the antiquated, broken-down equipment that had been holding them back for a decade. I gave substantial, well-deserved raises and improved benefits to the dedicated, hard-working factory floor employees he had systematically underpaid and taken for granted for years, and I only laid off the incompetent, sycophantic senior managers who had been his loyal, do-nothing yes-men, poisoning the culture. I implemented my own sleek Nexus logistics software throughout the entire, tangled supply chain, creating stunning, immediate efficiencies and cost savings that amazed the remaining staff. The people who had once watched me be publicly mocked and humiliated at company picnics now looked at me with a newfound, genuine respect and a spark of hope in their eyes. I was successfully, tangibly building what he never could and never understood. A sustainable, modern, ethical business run on a solid foundation of empathy, innovation, and basic human fairness and decency. My father officially, quietly retired shortly thereafter, a quiet, shadowy, and unceremonious event with no retirement party, no glowing speech, and no fanfare or gold watch. It was as if he simply vanished from the business world he had once dominated. My mother came to see me at my new, light-filled home a few weeks later, a place I had bought with my own success. She hugged me tightly, crying soft, quiet tears on my shoulder, but this time, her tears seemed like tears of relief, release, and maybe even a little pride. "You broke it, Nora," she whispered into my hair, her voice filled with a kind of reverent awe as if I had performed an exorcism. "You actually broke the terrible, generations-old curse of pride and toxicity in this family. You ended it." For the very first time, standing there in my own home, I felt the profound, healing truth of her words settle deep into my soul, mending an old, invisible wound. My victory wasn't just about business acumen or financial success. It was about breaking a vicious, destructive cycle and setting a new, healthy, hopeful precedent for the future, for any children I might have one day. At the first annual, joyful, combined company picnic for the newly merged businesses, a young, bright-eyed, and clearly nervous intern tentatively approached me while I was speaking with a group of my senior managers. She hesitantly, stammeringly mentioned she had an idea for streamlining and improving our client onboarding process, which she felt was still too cumbersome. I immediately stopped my conversation, turned my full, undivided, and encouraging attention to her, and listened intently to every single word she said, asking thoughtful questions. Because I remembered, with painful, crystal-clear clarity, exactly what it felt like to be a young person with a dream and a good idea, and to be brutally, dismissively silenced and made to feel small and worthless. Across the crowded, cheerful, sun-drenched lawn, I saw my father standing alone under a large, shady oak tree, silently, almost ghost-like, watching the vibrant festivities from a cold, self-imposed distance. I couldn't tell, and it was no longer my burden to decipher, if the look on his face was one of grudging, reluctant pride or simply utter, complete, and total defeat. And in that moment, standing in the warm sun surrounded by my loyal, happy team and the sounds of laughter, I realized with a profound, peaceful finality that it truly no longer mattered to me. The victory, in every sense that was important, moral, financial, personal, was entirely, unquestionably mine, and it was complete and absolute. He spent years mocking my business idea, until the day I calmly and confidently signed the papers that made me the legal owner of his company, his legacy, and his greatest failure.